Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things Second Amendment, all things firearms, you name it, from coast to coast, wherever it's happening, we're trying to talk about it here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment to like and share this video feed so that your friends can join in the conversation right now. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already done it. Follow us on Facebook, and when you do so, make sure you mark it so that you get the notifications when these conversations go live, so that you can be a part of the conversation as it is happening. I don't get a chance to really go back and look at all of the conversation until afterwards. And, like I said, this is some really cool stuff, some really cool things going on. I really appreciate you guys chiming in. So please feel free to not just join into the conversation, but invite your friends to do the same. Also, go to FPCGear.com. That's FPCGear.com. This is a way in which, we all love you guys for you guys to be members, which, by the way, you can become a member of FPC at joinfpc.org. But, yes, it's great. And you can be a member and you can donate. But here's a chance for you to not just donate, but to actually get some cool T-shirts and still, in that, support the cause. Not just, by contributing and giving money, but also by wearing the stuff, by letting people know that you believe in the Second Amendment and you believe in the Firearms Policy Coalition. So it's FPCGear.com, FPCGear.com, always uploading new stuff. It'll be there for you. Anyway, now today's topic is going to be an interesting one because we all hear about gun buyback programs. And every study, doesn't matter really which side of the gun debate that you're on, pretty much anybody who is serious about being involved in the discussion about firearms policy knows and recognizes that gun buyback programs simply do not work. They do absolutely nothing to reduce or prevent gun violence. They are simply nothing more than feel-good programs. Well, in the spirit of making us feel good, I thought that you might find it interesting to take a look at some of the items, what I like to call the five stupidest things that show up at a gun buyback program or that turn up at a gun buyback program. And I thought you would find these interesting, and I'm sure that if you've followed the news, none of these are any surprise, but who knows? Maybe they are. So check it out. So number 5 on the list, number 5 stupidest thing that is going to appear are junk guns. That's right. We know largely that junk guns are what turn up. In many cases, you have people who are showing up who may have the old beat up Saturday night special, barely functioning firearm that, will probably blow up in your hand if you actually try to shoot it. But a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take these firearms and they'll sell them or get rid of them at these gun buyback programs because they can't get anyone else to buy these guns. There was one instance in Oakland where a couple of dealers showed up to this one in Oakland, and they basically, between the two of them, they had 60 firearms, 60 of them. They were all junk guns, and they got $100 a pop for each one of these firearms that was, if functional, was barely functional. Many cases, you're talking about firearms that are, someone bought a gun and they put it, in their purse and put it in a cabinet or put it in a shoebox or put it in their nightstand, and the gun was never opened, never used, never fired. So we know that junk guns are probably one of the biggest things that you'll find at gun buyback, one of the or stupidest things that you will find. These are not guns that are being used in crimes. These are guns that are basically were sitting in a cabinet somewhere. They will do absolutely nothing to reduce gun violence. But junk guns will be number 5 on the list. Number 4 on the list, homemade firearms. That's right. I know you are shocked to realize that, yes, homemade firearms are oftentimes wind up as a part of these gun buyback programs. Zip guns. I mean, we're talking firearms that take about $5 to make. And in turn, they are taking these to these gun buyback programs, and they're getting, whether it's gift cards or cash, they're getting somewhere between $75, $100, even up to $250. This right here is an example of a homemade shotgun that meets the definition of a shotgun, of a long gun. So in this particular case, this individual got what I believe would have been $100 at the gun buyback program where they turned in this firearm. This does look like a very dangerous weapon, not so much for the person it would be pointed at, but for the person who's actually trying to shoot it. Yeah, I don't know how much I necessarily trust that firearm, but having said that, it's a gun. And it was confiscated, or it was turned in at a gun buyback program. Moving right along to number 3, rocket launchers. Now, first of all, these are always a big story. We see them all the time. These big, huge stories about, wow, did you see this rocket launcher that turned in? You know, I've seen it in San Jose. I've seen it in New York, I've seen it in LA, I've seen it in Oakland, and they parade around these bazookas, for lack of a better term, these rocket launchers. But what they fail to tell you is that in every case, just about every single case, these are single-use rocket launchers, meaning they're tubes. So once the rocket has been launched out of it, they are pretty much empty tubes. And they're really not worth anything. And the ones that don't look like these tubes, there's some of them. I saw one that was being held up by a cop in Los Angeles, a Los Angeles County sheriff, and you could clearly see in the markings on it that it was a replica, that it was for training purposes only. So in other words, someone turned in a replica rocket launcher. And they got, whatever the assault weapon amount was for that particular case. I believe it was $250 for this thing that they probably paid $50-$60 for at some store, at some Army surplus store. That's right. We've seen them all the time. So that's number 3. Number 3 is rocket launchers. And now those are the things that pretty much are largely on the worthless end. You know, these are things where you have people who are actually turning these things in order to turn a profit. They're trying to get more than they're actually turning in. In some cases, you actually wind up with people who actually turn in firearms that are very, very expensive. Like in one case, there was a STG-44. Now, this is a German-made firearm that is worth $30,000. $30,000, and it was turned in to a gun buyback program for $200. For $200, a collector's item, a curio German firearm that once again should be sitting in someone's collection or in a museum somewhere was turned in for nothing. And that's the thing. A lot of times, if you guys ever watch like my wife and I sometimes, when we're flipping the channels, we like hitting those shows where you see the guy is sitting there at these antique shows and he's appraising something that someone picked up because they want to know what it's worth. Because a lot of times when you buy something, you don't know if you bought something expensive. Sometimes it just looks old. But if it's the right thing, if it's the right model, if it's in the right condition, it can actually be worth a lot of money. And a lot of times when people buy, whether it's antiques or whether it's an old antique firearm, or maybe it's an item that they purchased, they found it at a yard sale, or maybe it was something that you have those people who buy the Storage Wars. If you guys watch Storage Wars, sometimes it's something maybe was put in storage. People often never know exactly what it is that they've got. And so you have people who have, or maybe they inherited it and don't know what it is. They just thought it was grandpa's old gun and they just wanted to get rid of it. They don't even realize that they have something that is worth a lot of money. So one of the stupidest things is you have something that, once again, ought to be sitting in a museum, ought to be the individual ought to be making some money by selling it to a collector because it is something that is not going to be used in gun crimes. And I want to make clear, the reason why these are all stupid things is because none of these items are these things that show up at gun buybacks are going to be used to commit gun violence. None of them. They're not. In this case, we're talking about these antique collectible firearms that are worth, in this case, tens of thousands of dollars. Now, mind you, because there is a chance that these things are going to occur, that these sorts of firearms are actually going to wind up there, the next thing that you're likely to see at a gun buyback program is actually buyers. People who are there, who show up in order to purchase the firearms. There was a case. We'll go back to the case in Oakland where, basically a guy showed up and they set up about 20 feet away from the gun buyback program, and they'll go out there with signs and they'll say, "Look, we'll give cash for guns." A lot of times you'll have FFLs that'll be out there, or gun dealers or collectors, and they're looking for firearms. In many cases, they can buy a firearm for whatever the going rate is. Instead of getting a gift card for $100, you get $100 cash. And then they can turn around and they'll have a firearm that they can turn around and sell for $250, $300, sometimes $500, or in some cases they come up on a really expensive firearm that is available. So oftentimes at these things, you wind up getting buyers. So instead of having a gun buyback program, which, by the way, let me be clear, these are not gun buyback programs because the government never owned them. The government never owned them, so they are not gun buyback programs. They are simply gun buying programs where they give you a little bit of money and you give up your ability to defend yourself. But that's a whole other story. But yeah, so that's one of the things that you will see is you'll actually wind up seeing buyers, people who are there to purchase firearms, will wind up at these particular events. And now, this is the one that's kind of the bonus. What you will wind up finding at gun buyback programs are guns used in crimes. Now, you're asking me, you're saying, but Craig, most of these are, most of these are run by law enforcement. How can you wind up with gun crime or with crime guns? Well, because these are pretty much run as don't ask, don't tell. In other words, no questions asked. You bring the firearm, you turn it in, you get your cash, you get your gift card. Almost never do they ever ask them where the gun came from. Almost never do they get the name and address and the information of the person who's turning in the firearm. They don't even bother largely to check ballistics against the firearms that are being turned in once they're turned in. I mean, if nothing else, even if you didn't collect the name and the number or any of that, at least you can identify that this is if this was a firearm that was used in a crime. But they don't. And so it becomes a way in which criminals can dispose of a weapon that's been used in a crime. And once it's been turned into the gun buyback program, it's broken the chain of evidence. It can no longer be used as evidence against the criminal. So it's almost the perfect way to do it, because then you're going to hand it over to the police. The police aren't going to test it, and then they're going to take it and they're going to melt it down. Yeah, they're going to melt it down, and the criminal in the end will wind up getting away with it. Yeah. So anyway, those are the stupidest things that you will find that wind up or turn up at a gun buyback program. It is the reason I forgot to include the slimy politician, but then again, they generally don't bother to show up at these things unless there's going to be a photo op. But that's pretty much it. Look, folks, gun buyback programs are, if you decide that you simply do not want to own your firearms anymore, don't go to a gun buyback program. Go to a local dealer. Go to a local FFL. Let them regift your firearms. let them help you dispose of that collection or of those firearms. Do not take it to the government where it's simply going to be melted down. Because here's the thing. You may decide that you don't want to utilize a firearm to exercise your right to keep and bear arms, but there may be someone else who does. And by being in a position where they can purchase your used firearm, if it's in decent condition, but if they can purchase your used firearm, you can actually help make the right to keep and bear arms affordable for some folks who may not be able to afford it. So, once again, please avoid the gun buyback programs. And by the way, don't let your tax dollars be used for this stuff. If you can avoid it, go to your city council member, go to your county board of supervisors, tell them to stop wasting money on these programs that do not reduce gun violence at all. Tell them do not put your money, my tax dollars, into a gun buyback program. And all right, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. I hope you folks have a fantastic weekend, and we'll look forward to talking to you again on Monday. Remember, this is the home in the fight for civil rights. You got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys, take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.